My name is Dennis Gill with the Americans in Wartime Experience. Today's date is 15 January 2022, and I've got the pleasure of speaking with Chris Allan. So, Chris, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. Where were you born? Where'd you grow up? That kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in the town of Springfield, Massachusetts. I was raised there pretty much my whole life until I went off to college in 1997. I went out to Chicago to Wheaton College, got my bachelor's in the arts in the field of theology. Was getting ready to study and get my master's in divinity when 9/11 happened. It just happened to happen between when I graduated that year and right about when I was getting ready to start that track of my study. And like for most people, that it just changed kind of everything and really the trajectory of certain portions of my life.
Right. Tell us about that day, what you remember from it. You were in college, you said?
So I'd just gotten out of college, and a few months before I'd actually done some traveling, backpacking in Europe with a very close friend of mine, and was just between school, really. I remember that day being woken up by a call from a friend. I had to work. I was waiting tables, just again between my schools, and I just remember my buddy. His nickname was Squid, but Squid called me and I'm like, "Hey, what's up, man?" He goes, "We're under attack." And I just remember thinking, what a goofball.
Right.
I said, "What are you talking about, man?" And with the most serious and grave voice, and this is not a serious and grave guy, he said, "Dude, we're under attack. Turn your television on." And I remember turning the television on and just the visions of two towers burning. So I was in shock, probably like everybody else in the country. I think what made it hit home even more is that after I'd gone into work, I was working at Chili's at the time. I get there, there's nobody there except me and the bartender. And we've got the TV on, of course, our eyes are glued. And then I get a call from my mother, who is frantic because my father had happened to fly out of the airport that day, right about the time when those towers had hit. We had no way of getting hold of him for, I think, about 24 hours.
What airport did he fly out?
He flew out of Bradley International, which is in Hartford.
Okay.
But we knew that I think at that point we knew that one of the planes had flown out of New England. And the timing where he flew out would have coincided when the planes hit. Now, we didn't know this till later, once my father finally got a hold of us. But he had been flying over the tower a minute or two before the plane hit. And at that point, they diverted the flights to Georgia. He couldn't find a way to get home. He had to wait till he could get a rental and had to drive from Georgia all the way to New England, which is probably like a 16-plus hour drive. So it was very real to me. This involved family. Although I didn't lose my father that day, he just as well could have been one of those victims. So that struck me. At that point, I decided I needed to reflect. With the intention of going back to seminary, I kind of shelved it and decided to work. The economy obviously took a kind of a nosedive after that, after a while, it just got to the point where it wasn't feasible at that time to go, and that's when I started considering service. So I come from a background of military people. My uncle Carl was one of the people that was present at the dropping of the atomic bomb. He was on the plane that flew behind the one, because there were 4 planes on the bombing Hiroshima. He was the flight engineer on the plane behind the one that dropped the bomb. My uncle was present at Iwo Jima. He was on a troop transport. Many other places in the Pacific and the European theater in World War II. I also had a great-grandfather who served in the Home Guard during World War I. So long family history of military service. Nobody in my generation had served in the military. None of my cousins, my brother couldn't because of his health issues. So I don't know, I guess I felt this rising burden to do something, to be a part of something, to say that I'd served my country also in the name of my family and I guess my generation too. In 2003, as the war in Iraq looked inevitable, actually about 2 to 3 weeks before the war started, in very early March of 2003, I'd finally decided to take a step and join the Army Reserve. And I did that, and I was shipped off to basic, actually while the invasion was going on.
Any particular reason for the Army? Did you have any inkling of what you wanted to do?
Yeah, I was always kind of someone who was interested in the Army. You know, I'd vaguely consider the Marine Corps, but no one in my family really ever served in the Marine Corps, and I was like, I don't know about that. For some reason, I just felt like, I don't know if that's for me. I went to the Army recruiter, and my father had been in the Army. He was a APC driver and air defense guide during the Vietnam era, served in Germany. And I don't know, the Army was just kind of the branch that I felt called to. If it hadn't been, it would have probably been the Navy, because I have a lot of people that served in the Navy as well.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know, I felt like I just was meant for the Army, and I wanted to be a part of it. I'd always been enamored by it as a kid. Like every other Halloween, I think I probably went out as a special force guy or soldier. So it had always been something that I was interested in. And I don't know, I felt a calling and signed on the dotted line, and that was that.
What did you do in the Army?
So when I signed up, I had a few options. To be honest, I wanted to be in combat arms. I'd asked them if I could be a tanker, just kind of like my dad. That was always what I kind of wanted to be. I didn't understand the dynamics of the military at that point. I didn't realize that if you want to be in a reserve, you basically have the National Guard and the Reserve, and the National Guard is what does all the combat arms. Well, I just happened to go into the Army Reserve, and they didn't tell me that. So they started offering me all kinds of things. I scored extremely high on my ASVAB, and they're like, well, you could be a medical guy, you could be a paralegal, you could do all this stuff. And I'm like, this doesn't sound Army to me. I want to do something, quote unquote cool. Well, the only thing that they had at that point, beside these other things that, there's nothing wrong with them, it just wasn't what I wanted to do, was something called Imagery Analysis. And they said it's really cool. You get a TS clearance. You're going to deal with, intelligence and space technology and all this cool. And so I thought, all right, if that's the coolest thing you can offer me, and there's nothing else, it sounds like I'll go through door number 3. So I chose that, and yeah, so that was my MOS, and yeah, graduated school. Me and who is now one of my best friends, we were kind of dual honor grads. I think he was like maybe 0.1% higher than me, but we both got the certificate, and yeah, so I got out of the MOS school in November of 2003, and went home to find out that my unit was already in Iraq. It's kind of ironic when I think about it now, because I actually joined thinking, gosh, I would love to be a war veteran, but I don't think I'm going to make it, because my only experience as a kid with the war was to go for it. I mean, that thing was over before you could blink. So I'm like, man, I don't think I'm going to get a chance to serve. So the shock of coming out, and right before I came out, they're like, well, you and the other reservists, you got to find out where your unit is. I'm asking around, and they say, oh yeah, they're already in Iraq. They went in right after the initial invasion, and they're already there. So I was kind of shocked, because it's like, we thought this would be over, and then as I'm going through school, we're like, I think this is going to be a little bit longer than we thought. And then kind of things started getting dicey and going south, and it's like, we might be there for a very long time. So going home, where I thought, shucks, I'm going to miss this thing, now I'm thinking, it's only a matter of time before I end up going.
So your MOS, you were an image analysis?
Yeah.
What does that entail?
So imagery analysis is part of the discipline of intelligence. Intelligence is about finding, knowing, never losing the enemy. That's kind of our slogan. And it's as a lot of famous people would say, it's almost the most important part of fighting. You can't fight what you don't know. Imagery analysis involves the visual aspect of intelligence gathering. And imagery analysis, there's a lot of different ways they do it. Most of it's happening at a very high classification level, but bottom line is, what it's allowing you to do is see where the enemy is at, see what the enemy has for his forces, and then anticipate his moves because of that. And then also we did other things like battle damage assessment, like if there was ever a fight, you could use imagery to figure out, did we get the objective
Right.
that we needed to get? Did we destroy what we were trying to destroy? What's the disposition of the force after a fight? So things like that. And there's obviously a lot of other things involved in that.
When did you finally make it to Iraq?
So interesting enough, I got married in 2005. I had gotten into sales at this point because it was again, I trying to get back to my seminary degree. Just it wasn't feasible at that point. So I'm working. I meet my wife, my bride, who now I've been married to for going on almost 17 years. We got married. I had a friend who was very successful in real estate, was selling hotels, doing very well, and he said, "Buddy, I want you to join me down here in Florida. We're rocking it. The economy is red hot." And I had a job. It wasn't a bad job, but I didn't really like it. And we just felt like we needed to get out of New England. So I said, "Hey, babe, I want to take a risk. Let's go to Florida." So about a month after we got married, we started making plans. And by, I think, March of 2005, we were gone. We were in Florida. I got my real estate license. My buddy made me a sales director for his company. So I was a PC, which is kind of like an independent contractor working, basically heading up the entire division. Well, as fate would have it, right after I got my license, things are starting to go well. I'm getting ready to get into the work. All of a sudden, I get a letter saying you have been called up. You have been placed in to a unit that will be deploying to Iraq. And the irony is I'd actually transitioned to another unit because I had to do my drill reserve duty. Right. So I transferred from the 325 MI battalion up in Massachusetts at Fort Devens to this site at Fort Gordon in Georgia, to a unit there. I actually went to this unit for my first drill, and they looked at me and said, "You're not a part of this unit anymore." And I said, "What are you talking about?" They just flew me up here. They said, "You've already been moved to a unit that's going to Iraq." So I was caught in limbo. I didn't even know what was going on. So I go home and realize, all right, I got to go. There was about an 8 to 9 month run up to that, trying to figure out, okay, how do I get in touch with this unit? What do I do? I hadn't drilled in almost 7, 8 months, but eventually got squared away, got put in the unit. We ended up I ended up going on orders, I believe, on the 5th of May, 2007, and started what turned out to be about a 6-week training course. Another irony is that imagery analysts generally we work desks, right? We're combat support, so we work with in the secure facilities. We're working with a lot of computers, stuff like that. Well, the Army decided they needed us to do something different, and they said, "Well, you're actually going to be an air crewman. And you're going to be flying on a new outfitted surveillance bird that's going to be trying to take care of this little problem we have called IEDs." And so I find out, oh, all right, so I'm actually going to be going outside the wire. I'm going to be doing stuff, even though I know nothing about aviation. And honestly, I kind of was afraid of flying. I never liked flying. And now I find out I'm going to be flying in this fairly small propeller plane in a combat zone. So it was a little jarring. But they trained us up, and we shipped out, and I think I got into country right before my 30th birthday in, I think it was late June of 2007.
Okay. What are your first impressions when you get there?
So I remember as we spent a little time in Kuwait. I'd never been to a desert before. I remember the first time I saw camels, herd of camels, and I'm like, wow, I'm really not in New England or Florida anymore. I remember feeling extreme heat like I never had. Stepping out of a plane after midnight and feeling 90 degrees of heat is a weird experience. And all the prep up, and then finally when we flew, and I do remember when we were in the C-130, after they land and we hit the ground, and then they drop the back, and all of a sudden it opens up to this misty, dark, dirty desert night. It just kind of hit me that, wow, you're in a war zone now. You're there. This is real. It's not like one of those movies you watched. And this is going to be your reality for at least a year. So it was a strange feeling. It's a feeling of fear, exhilaration, confusion, kind of all at once. And you're kind of containing that in yourself to look dignified among your fellow soldiers, because you know that everybody else feels exactly the same way you do.
What are your duties? What do you do now that when you're there? Tell me about a typical day.
So typical day. So it's a little bit interesting for us because as air crewmen, so most guys are working 7 days a week, 8 to 12-hour days. Obviously, you got the lovely Army duties that they give you, like guard duty and whatever else they need you to do, running to the chow hall. And we did some of that stuff. But as air crewmen, we actually we did have some perks because of how taxing flying can be on your body, and it really does make you tired, because in a little jittery propeller plane, you get tired. Some of the greatest tired I ever felt was flying and then coming back from a mission. So we actually were only allowed to fly about 4 to 5 times a week. So we were doing missions 4 to 5 times a week, where we're going outside the wire, a plethora of different types of missions we were doing. Most of them involved IED hunting, covering convoys, going out to find insurgent strongholds, helping in HVT hunts. Really a whole lot of stuff we got to do. Really cool stuff, actually. And then the other 3 days of the week, we would kind of have downtime. So we actually had it, when it came to the economy of time, we had a little bit much more leeway than some of the other soldiers had, just because of the requirement for downtime when you fly.
What are you doing on this airplane? What is your job?
So the airplane we were flying was called a C-12R1. C-12s are a venerable old bird. I think they started flying them in 1964, if I'm not mistaken, and it kind of been a mainstay of the U.S. Army. I really fell in love with the frame. It's a plane that I grew to respect. It was very sturdy, strong, reliable. You could do a lot with it. It originally was a VIP transport, so they would use the C-12s to kind of move around dignitaries and other high-level Army people for meetings and things like that. But they realized you could do a lot more with it, so they refitted it. Some had been refitted to be SIGINT platforms, which is just signals intelligence, things like that. But we had been put on a new one called the C-12R1, which is it's basically a manned, kind of like a manned drone. Like, it's a full motion video camera. We had a lot of radios. We had a lot of other cool stuff that it's probably still classified, I can't talk about, but just a lot of cool things that would help us fight against a very, very difficult problem set, which was the problem of the insurgency and the way that they were fighting us at the time. So I, as the air crewman and what was called officially, I think, the sensor operator, I would operate the sensor gimbal, which is that's basically a camera. It had all different kinds of modes. We had laser range finders, illuminators. We also had, I think we had 2 or 3 different types of radios. So basically, my job during the mission would be to communicate with ground units, to communicate with combat air support when we needed to work with them, and also to use the various imagery sensors that we had to get the mission done and to collect intelligence. Some of that intelligence would be real time and would actually be sent to the ground units that we were supporting during operations.
So they may be out on a convoy going somewhere,
yeah.
And you guys would be providing, for lack of a better term, providing cover,
we would provide cover. Sometimes we would go out to remote areas to try to see what the enemy was doing. Like I said, the missions were actually very, very broad. A lot of it involved IED hunting, but it was more than that. It was basically, we could do all kinds of stuff, and it would really depend on the day. One of the things that I thought was really interesting for me were 2 things. One was the fact that we actually got to go all over the country. A lot of guys, when they served, they would be stationed, at like Warhorse, which was a place I think down in Samara, or they'd be at Camp Taji down near Baghdad, or you know, Al-Assad out in the Western Desert. We kind of got to go everywhere. So you know, I flew missions most parts of the country, you know, everywhere from Nasiriyah in the deep south of the country, you know, places close to Basra, which is like really south, to Al-Rutbah near Jordan, up on the western desert, the Al Jazeera Desert, I believe it was called, up near Syria, Mosul, Tikrit, Bakuba, I mean, Baghdad, everywhere. Like, we were everywhere, literally. So I got to see most corners of Iraq. Right. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah. So you talked about a little bit of anxiety when you first get there.
Yeah.
I'm sure that ramps up a little bit, right? Your first time you're actually in the air and you're in combat, per se.
Yeah, I mean, it did. There were several times, you know, I think in the past I've heard people say that, you know, war is mostly drudgery, it's mostly waiting, it's mostly the frustration of being away from family. That also mixes with a camaraderie, you know, a camaraderie that's very unique. You have time, you know, when you're not out doing your job, you have a lot of time. You have a lot of time to talk and reflect and build relationships and get to know people, other soldiers. You get to do kind of funny things, you know. Like I remember we did everything from. I remember the first day I got there, they were taking a scorpion and a camel spider, and they threw them in like a little like a mop bucket, and would let them go at each other, and like they would. You know, they would just have bats or just watch it, and they like just corny stuff to let the time pass. And to kind of distract you from, again, the drudgery of everyday life. And, you know, obviously we went to the gym and did all this other stuff. But, you know, then there was the handful of times where you find yourself in a serious situation. And, you know, there were many of those times where, you know, you're just in a situation where you realize, wow, this is really happening. You know, bullets are flying. I'm watching people being attacked. I don't know if we're being attacked, because, you know, we're on a plane, but we're not flying all that high, and the insurgents had weapons that they could use against us, especially as we're taking off and landing. So it's hard to know, you know. We also had a flare system on the plane for defense against the shoulder launch missiles, which was kind of that was the biggest fear we had. And some of my team actually ended up getting fired at with those missiles. And the funny thing is the flare system was a little finicky, so if you happen to fly over something that reflects a lot of energy, sometimes it would kick them off. So, like, I remember the first time we were flying over a refinery in Baiji, which is kind of an area where we had a lot of trouble when I was there. Luckily, I had some really, really amazing experienced pilots that kind of knew their plane and knew the equipment. And the first time I experienced the flares, my pilot, one of my favorite pilots, his name was Clark. I mean, this guy's a Vietnam vet. He's been in the military for probably almost 40 years. And he said, guys, we're flying over a hot spot. Don't be surprised if the flares goes off. Well, he told us, and I said, okay. But I'll tell you, when those flares kick off for the first time and the alarm system goes off, even though you know you're okay, it is really jarring. Because it sounds like someone's throwing rocks against the plane, almost like it's being hit with bullets. And the loud pitch, you know, dee 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 dee, like it's you know, it's very jarring, and just, you can prepare for it all you want, but to actually experience that was pretty difficult. And, you know, there was other things that happened. You know, there were times where there were a few times where we were in a position where you think, wow, what's happening right now could lead to me getting hurt or dying. I remember one event where we were supporting a group of soldiers up in Mosul during an operation, and we'd been notified that they had identified an insurgent who had a man pad, which is what they call the shoulder launch missiles used for planes, and that he was getting ready to fire that man pad. And so the pilot I had at the time, he's a pretty cool guy. He'd done a lot of daring stuff before, and he was the guy that would run into the action. Right. And the thing is that they said that they think they have intel that this guy's getting ready to fire, and whatever flies over. Well, it just happened we're the only air asset in the area, so if he's going to fire, it's going to be at us. Well, my pilot's like, we got to find this guy, and so he drops altitude and flies into the village where this guy is. So like, if we were a target before, now we're even more of a target. And that was one of, I think, a few times. There was a few times where I was like, wow, this could be it for us, you know. That was pretty scary. And then landing in a sandstorm. There was another time I was flying with one of our pilots, and we were in a position where normally you got to have a certain visibility to be able to land. The airport that we were part of, we were at Cobb Spiker, which is in Tikrit. It's the old Air Force Academy when you know, during the Saddam era. But like, it wasn't very advanced. Like, they had a tower, they had some radar, but a lot of it was visual. So, you know, this is not like flying into like O'Hare. And if we had less than a mile of visibility, we're not supposed to land. Well, we get there, we're at one of those points where a big sandstorm just came up, and I mean, the sky is like brown, and you're at that point where now you have to make a judgment call if you're going to land or not. Because if not, you got to go to another base, which means you're going to have to go sleep somewhere in your nasty, sweaty clothing that you've been wearing, and then basically wait for whatever amount of time to then come back. And we're like, do we really want to do that? So the pilot made the decision to land, and as we're coming in, we could really not see that much. And we came in really hot. We came in really hot, but not just really hot. We came in at an angle, and I just remember that we hit the ground, and then it seemed like, and I'm sitting in the back, so I can see everything out the window now. We hit the back, and then it seemed like the plane tipped up kind of like this. And for about 3-4 seconds, I literally thought the plane was going to fall on its butt. And I was going to be the first thing to meet that pavement, and just thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to die right here. But somehow this pilot, because he's just amazing, somehow flattened that thing out, and we landed, and we were okay. But and then there was one other instance too where we had actually a leakage on the engine when we were way out in the middle of nowhere in the desert, and I happened to be the one to catch it. Seeing this unidentified substance cascading out of the engine, right. I knew it wasn't water because of the way it was kind of reacting to the wind as it was being pushed, and announcing that, and just remembering the only thing that made me feel good about the fact that I'm in a plane that's now leaking something out of one of its 2 engines is just the relaxed response of the pilot that said, okay, we'll declare an emergency, we'll go home. And yeah, of course we got home all right, but I think that's another thing that I remember from my experience is just how important good officers and good soldiers can be for others. And just remembering the tremendous respect and confidence I had for my pilots, officers, warrant officers. I think we served with 3 or 4 guys that were Vietnam vets, like legit combat vets, like, you know, Silver Star earners. I mean, these guys were the real deal, and just the confidence and comfort that we got for that during our missions, and just what dignity and poise these guys had, and how that really helped kind of some of the younger guys like us.
You had talked earlier about almost being a little bit disappointed. You're thinking, okay, man, I'm not going to get into combat. Once you're in combat, and it becomes real, it's not just something you've seen on TV now or read in a book. Does that attitude change a little bit? Like, you're maybe this wasn't such a great idea, or?
Honestly, the biggest impression I had about, you know, the handful of experiences, again, most of it's drudgery, most of it's doing laying the groundwork, but for the handful of times where you're really in the thick of things, and you are, bullets are flying, you're watching people get hurt and be scared, and you're experiencing the chaos on the radios and everything else that's going on. The biggest impression I had, and again, you can read about this and hear about this, but to experience it is different, is you know, what they call the fog of war. You're in a position where you're with other people that you've grown to trust because you know you have to trust each other. And you can prepare as much as you want, and you can try to do everything right. But when that fog of war lies in, I guess what I would say is that there's a certain degree of difficulty in the decisions you make, moral ambiguity, knowing that you have a handful of choices and not being sure which choices are going to be the best to make. There was one experience in particular that I had with a buddy of mine who I believe he's going to be here today to interview too. But like when you have bad information, when you have incomplete information, when you're put into a situation where you can't not respond, you have to respond, and you're not sure exactly what response is best, then you make that response, and then things don't turn out the way you want them to, and there's serious consequences. It's a horrible and difficult thing, and I think that's one of the other. I think it's been said, the casualty of war is innocence. There are a lot of good people that are put in positions where, unfortunately, you could have prepared all you wanted, you could have done everything that you thought was right, and at the end of the day, things don't turn out great, or people get hurt, or people die, or whatever, things happen, and that's one of the most difficult things. And I think one of the things that until you experience it, it's very hard to understand, because you can hear it, but hearing and experiencing and feeling it is very, very different. And that's one of the things I think that's hardest for people that have served, especially that have served in a combat zone, as opposed to people that have never have. It's almost like a bridge you can't fully gap, and I think that's one of the reasons you find such a unique camaraderie and bond between people that are in that position. To this day, some of my closest friends, people that I have a bond that I just really can't have that same bond with other people, are these same guys and girls that I served with, just because there's something we have that is unique and that nobody else can have. I guess that's the blessing and the reward at the end of it, is that when you go through these things, for survivors, for people, you carry a burden, a little bit of a burden with you the rest of your life knowing that, but at the same time you carry this incredible blessing in genuine, solid relationships with people that you just have a tremendous love, respect, and trust for, and that's never going away.
You were married at the time.
Yeah.
Were you able to regularly contact your wife, talk to her, tell her what was going on?
Yeah.
Did you want to tell her what was going on?
Yeah. So it was interesting for me in the sense that I was a newlywed. I really hadn't been married that long. I'd been married for a little over a year when I get called up, and at the same time, I brought my wife out of her comfort zone. I'd taken and moved her away from everyone she knew to this new place, 2,000 miles away down in Florida. She'd already started a career at this point, so she couldn't leave. And so I think the biggest thing for me is maybe there was a little residual guilt that, like, I move her down there, I get called up, and now she's been left there. And I was gone for the better part of almost 14 months. So so it definitely was taxing for newlyweds. I would say that for me, it created a very strong bond with her. She was dignified. She was very, she was faithful. She worked very hard. She created relationships to get her through. Yes, we were lucky in the sense that, if it had been like the Vietnam War, if it had been World War II, I'd be writing on the back of an MRE carton and sending in postcards and letters that could take literally months to get there. So I think one of the blessings of technology is we had MWRs, and I cannot thank enough the men and women of the this OSO that just really loved us. That were there, that made things like the MWR possible. They gave us things like exercise gyms and places to watch movies and play video games and read books and play poker and whatever. And also the ability to access computers to see what was going on with our businesses and our jobs, to phones. I tried to call my wife at least 4 to 5 times a week. Just, not long, 10, 15-minute conversations. Most of it was just sustaining that relationship. I didn't want to talk, and I didn't talk about anything that was going on. I remember when I came home from vacation, I was lucky enough to get off a Christmas break, And it's wonderful at the same time that it's hard, because I come home, but then I got to go back to that very dangerous place I was. And I just remember going to the mall the day before I took off to go home again. I remember my wife was just really volatile, got into it with this clerk at one of these clothes stores we went to, and it was nothing about the clerk really. It was just about the fact that she knew that her husband was going back to a very bad place for at least another 4 to 5 months, and just the difficulty of that, and what she had to endure. And that's the other thing that you learn about. It's when you're married, or when you have a spouse, significant other, kids, whatever. It's not just about you in the war zone. It's about you take everybody with you. Their heart goes with you. And I know that that's what it was like for my mother, and my father, and my brother, and my cousins, and my wife, and my business partner. They were all paying in some way for what I was doing, because I'm in a combat zone, but my good friend and kind of my business partner is now down his best employee. That's affecting him. My wife's in a place where she's a young, beautiful, single woman in a pretty fancy area, and she's got to just wait for the one she cares about to come home and take care of those needs. And parents, it's one thing every single day to know this is real and I'm here and I got to get through this, but there's also the parents that are thinking, who knows what they're thinking. Here's another day that my son is in harm's way, where there's people that want to kill him and they're within reach. So I think all of that was very, everybody pays. I guess everybody pays and everybody serves in some sense if they're connected to a veteran.
The war, as you know, was not, it was not very popular in this country, especially the longer it went on through 2006 and all that went on there. You know what's going on because you have access to a computer. I'm sure you can read the news and understand. Did that have any impact on you guys over there? The opinions that American people had?
So honestly, I think a lot of the folks that I served with were understanding. In a sense, you kind of try to detach yourself from what's going on out there. I remember seeing this movie that came out recently about soldiers in World War I called "They Will Not Grow Old." And if you just listen to some of these old Tommies from World War I, they just said, "Listen, there's just a job to do, and we did it." So I think for us, we're not detached from what people are saying. We're not detached from what's going on. I was there during the surge, which is when we had the highest number of soldiers. We had the highest number of casualties. It was a rough year. And it went from being, for my first tour, half of the tour, being pretty bad, to the last half, kind of things started quieting down. I think we tried to focus on just taking care of one another, kind of mixing this. It was a strange mixture of, I would say, detachment in the sense of distraction. We did fun things and funny things to kind of just get our mind off all these other things. And then the rest was just making sure we did our jobs well, so that we could get through this experience, so that we can say we did our duty, and kind of let everybody else figure. Politicians do have a job, but their job is to work these things out. I'm sure that some of the soldiers I served with were vehemently opposed to the decisions that had gotten us into that. There were others that firmly believed in it even after, we found out some of the pretext of the war was not really authentic. But at the end of the day, we're all there. We're all on the same team, and we just had to work together to get each other through this. There are multiple layers of I guess, loyalty. There's loyalty to your country even if you think your country is run by people that aren't making good decisions. There's loyalty to your fellow soldiers, because you understand you have to get their back and they have to get yours, even if I don't like their personalities. There were conflicts with various soldiers. Maybe they just, one person had a personality type that didn't get along well with others. And there was some tension. And of course that's being added to because we all have people we care about at home and we all have issues. Some of our guys got extended longer. Some of my friends actually ended up serving quite a bit longer, almost a year and a half. And after you're there for a year, then you find out you got to be stuck there for another 4 months. Especially as a reservist, who remember that this is not our day-to-day thing. We're soldiers just like any other soldier. There's no difference, I don't think. But when you have a job and all these other things, and you get hit with that, it's emotional. Sometimes it can feel like betrayal, like you're being used, and you got to work that out on your own. And we did. And you do that by griping. You do that by crying with each other. You do that by just making it the best you can, doing crazy things, creating memories. We created a lot of memories there. I probably have some of the best memories of my life for that 1 year that I was probably in the worst place I've ever been. And I've been to several countries, because I went on to do contracting with the military, so I've been all over the place. But that 1 year is still probably the most memorable and impactful year of my life. So, yeah, I think you know about it, but again, you just have to focus on what you have to do to get through it.
Tell us about your homecoming. You're home now, and you're not going back.
So it's interesting. You come back. What I remember about it is kind of a numbness. You come home. You get used to an alien life in an alien world, and it feels alien. It was all you could have told me I went to Mars, because everything's different. Everything's different from what you wear to what you see around you every day, to your daily routine, to how you interact with people, to the kind of things you experience. And then coming home, and I remember a few things. I remember first landing at Fort Dix, and all of a sudden I see green again for the first time in, 13 months, 12 months, whatever it was. I literally got down and I kissed the dirt and the grass. I literally did it. I just had this moment of, I guess realizing how blessed I was to have always lived in this wonderful country, and knowing that I'm back to a familiar space. That was a beautiful feeling. And then another time, there was a time where I would say I was a little bit jaded. I remember when we went back and we had to deprocess for a week, and I remember when they kind of huddled us after we got off the airplane. We were exhausted. I mean, we've been traveling for who knows how many hours, multiple stops. We're dirty. We're still in our dirty clothing. And I just remember, we had to listen to this speech, and then we have to stand up and do the pledge. And I just remember thinking, I don't want to be here. I just want to go home. And again, it's not about not loving your country or anything like that. It's just about feeling at the end of yourself, and then thinking about, how am I ever going to go back to anything that I knew before? Because the truth is that there's certain things in life that happen that change you. They change you in ways you can never be unchanged. In my life, there's two things, and I'll let other people speak for themselves, but there's two things in my life that have altered me in dramatic ways where there was no going back. And as a Christian, becoming a Christian, coming to understand the gospel, receive Jesus as my Lord and Savior, as we say, that changed me. I've never been able to unalter that incredible experience. The second is being a veteran. When you go from someone that passed through that kind of fire and then coming back, that there's just something that changes about you that never goes away. And that's something that the people you love have to learn to deal with. I remember when I came back, I had some difficulty when I first came back. There were a few experiences that were not positive. And again, when you have a wife who, we were living in Boca Raton. I mean, life was pretty good for her. And when you come home and all of a sudden you're having trouble with being around lots of people, or celebrating the 4th of July, and you just don't feel terribly comfortable, with big rocket displays and all these other things, and you kind of start thinking, how can I deal with this? And then you got to realize, I got to go back to work. I haven't worked a regular job in a year, and trying to remember what that feels like. It impacts everyone around you, because they love you, and they don't quite know what's going on with you. So it takes a lot of patience on their part, and they have to experience that as well. So, yeah, it was a mixture. I guess it was a mixture coming home of relief, joy, but also maybe a little bit of trepidation and fear, a little bit of I'm gonna maybe a little sorrow for what you brought back with you, but then also a lot of anticipation and hope, knowing that you're still here. You know, some people didn't come home, right? But you're still here, and you've got to live for yourself, for them, for everyone else, and hopefully you'll be able to help other people as best as you can without making them experience it, understand what it's like. And I would say that it's such a wonderful thing when you find people that do understand. Again, one other thing I remember is when we came home and we got to George at the airport, the USO was there. And people just applauded us and shook our hand. And it was a little bewildering because you're tired and everything, but at the same time you're thinking, this was not the experience of maybe people like my dad in Vietnam. And how wonderful and loved I felt, vice how it could have gone. So yeah, when it comes to things like this, it's really not just about the soldiers, the seamen, the airmen, the Marines, and Coast Guard. It's about the civilians and the part they play, and I guess the healing process, the reintegration, all that kind of stuff. It's just as important. It's just as important.
You look back on it from that day on September 11th, 2001 to the time you get home, and now that you've had time to look back 20 years.
Yeah.
You take the good, the bad, the ugly.
Yeah.
Was it worth it? Any regrets?
That's
when I say regrets,
yeah.
The decision to say I'm going to sign the dotted line.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I'm going to go ahead and say no. This is part of who I am now. You know, whenever you talk about the woulda, shoulda, coulda, it's an interesting thing. Could it have been different? You know, I've always been kind of an outside the box thinker, a pretty philosophical guy. You know, you ask those questions like, could it have been different? What if you could change it? You know, if I could change it, I don't. What would I have been? I look at my experience, and to be honest with you, no, I don't regret it at all. Do I regret things that happened? Do I regret maybe decisions that I'd made or certain aspects? You know, I could say yes, but at the same time, would I have been a better person if I hadn't experienced those things? Sometimes you have to say, you have to decide whether things happen for a reason or whether there's really nothing behind anything. I choose door number one. I believe everything happens for a reason. I believe that this was always destined to be a part of my life. I believe somehow I'm better and more whole for this experience, and it'll always be there with me. So, no, if theoretically you could take me back to the time where I signed the dotted line and give me an out, no, to be honest with you, I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. What I have gained by being able to say that I served, by what I have gained in the incredible, I'll just say, a brotherhood I have with not only my closest friends that I serve with, one of whom, again, who's coming in today, he's almost like he's like a big brother to me, and a huge influence in my life. I wouldn't have had that if I hadn't gone through this. And in the experience of again, not only being a veteran, but being a veteran of a war, again, it just creates, there's so many things you have to endure that are terrible, but then it also creates these other beautiful things that certain other people that don't serve will never experience. So I would have to say no. At the end of the day, no regrets.
Last question for you. The reason we do these is to preserve your story. Preserve it for your children, your grandchildren, and somebody else's grandchildren 50, 100 years down the road. What message would you like to send that person? What would you like them to get from this, from your experience?
I guess my hope is, my hope is that one day there won't be a need for veterans. You know, hopefully one day the human race will wake out of its just self-induced coma of folly, which leads to things that are war. You know, I would hope no one would think war is a good thing, because it's not. It's horrible. There's nothing worse than war. And the craziest thing about war is it's all self-inflicted. It's us killing ourselves. But at the end of the day, when when you face the reality of a broken human race, which is what we are, it's the veterans that do what they have to do, not because they want to, but because they know it's the best and rightest thing they can do, given the unideal of our current world. So what I would say is, for people now and in the future, regardless of what you feel about war, regardless of what you feel about the military or any of those things, what I would say is please have charity. Please have charity for men and women who, of their own accord, decide to put themselves into positions that they know could be tragic for their lives. Please show grace to them. So many people were casualties, not just during the war, but after, because they didn't feel that they were valued, that they didn't feel that they could ever reintegrate. One of our close friends, one of the people in my unit, is one of those casualties. A beautiful life, a brother in arms, someone we loved. He was goofy, right? But he lost his life after the war, at his own hands, because he just couldn't cope. So I would say, I think it's important whether you serve, whether you have people in your family or in your circle of friends that served or not. Please understand that there are people out there that are willing to do things that other people will never have to experience, and just show them the grace, instead of thinking about the, whatever position you take on things. I think if we learn to show grace to one another and goodwill, we can make it a lot better. Because again, one of the things that as a veteran you have to deal with is the war never really fully goes away. There's always a part of that's going to live with you, and when people are understanding or loving, when they honor us, when you do simple things like say thank you for your service, what that does is that kind of reinforces a worth that sometimes we as veterans may not feel in a given moment. So I guess that would be my biggest ask for people in the future going forward.
Well, on behalf of the Americans in Wartime Experience, thank you for sitting down and telling your story. It's important, as you know, to get those stories out and get them preserved. And more importantly, though, thank you for your service.
And thank you for letting me tell my story.
Thank you.
Yeah.